A team of Turkish archaeologists have discovered what they believe to be the remains of Noah's Ark on the highest peak in Turkey. The team began excavating the site in 2021 and found ancient samples of rock and soil that they believe contain clay and marine materials. The researchers believe that these materials are from Noah's Ark, which is mentioned in the Bible.
Something massive and sealed was found deep under the mountains of Turkey, exactly where Noah's Ark was said to rest. Within hours, researchers were reporting movements, signals, and structural features that no ancient vessel should contain.
Archaeologists, the details they need to plan and then be able to do that invasive excavation, try to see what's actually under there.
Several team members panicked and refused to continue. Authorities rushed in and shut the site down without explanation. Whatever they uncovered was not just old, it was waiting. The scans that should never have been released. The discovery immediately started with a jolt of fear when the first images appeared on the monitors in the temporary field lab set up near the Durupinar Formation in eastern Turkey. The ground-penetrating radar team expected another routine geological reading, but the screen displayed the unmistakable outline of a massive hollow structure beneath the mountain slope. The dimensions were so precise that the room fell silent. The object stretched roughly 300 cubits in length, exactly matching the measurements described in Genesis 6:15, where God instructed Noah to build an ark 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. This immediately raised alarm among the researchers because, according to established science, a wooden vessel of this size should have collapsed under its own weight, and no wooden structure buried for thousands of years should remain intact. In addition, most archaeologists argue that the global flood described in Genesis never occurred, so a preserved structure matching the biblical description would challenge centuries of accepted historical interpretation.
Stories, myths, and legends from the Holy Grail to Noah's Ark, and we're forever trying to find proof that these things exist.
An archaeologist whispered that they had to be misreading the data, but an engineer overrode him and insisted the reflections were too uniform. Natural rock does not create evenly spaced beams or corridors. The more they scanned, the clearer the internal layout became, and the team's reaction shifted from curiosity to deep unease. The expedition leader said that if this was not a man-made structure, then nothing in the field of geological study could explain it. The team worked through the night to gather additional data. The next morning, the team ran a second scan with deeper penetration, and that was when everything changed. The new scan showed heat inside one of the sealed chambers. The heat was weak, but clear. This shocked everyone because a wooden structure buried for thousands of years should be completely cold and lifeless. Yet the chamber gave off a warm glow that did not match any natural temperature in the area. The team gathered around the monitor as the thermal image formed a clear, bright cluster on the lower deck.
When they get about 8 feet down, 8.5 feet down, we're starting to see some parallel vertical structure.
A biologist immediately rejected the result and insisted the equipment was malfunctioning, but when the team ran a third scan, the same heat signature appeared again. This confirmed that something inside the structure was producing active heat. The situation became even more disturbing when the radar pulses began bouncing back with the sound profile of metal. These echoes were scattered throughout the interior. No ancient civilization from the supposed time of Noah had the ability to build a wooden ship with metal reinforcement on this scale. The engineers pointed out that the reflections matched the pattern of a structure that had been intentionally strengthened with internal metal parts, which would be impossible for a Bronze Age culture. The more the team studied the scans, the more frightened they became, because the evidence pointed to construction techniques far beyond anything known from that period. The implications caused immediate tension in the room. Several members became visibly nervous, and one researcher said that the images should never be released. He warned that if the public saw this data, people would connect it to the words of Jesus in Matthew 24:37, where Jesus says that the world at the end of time will look like the world in Noah's day. In that passage, Jesus explains that before the flood, people ignored every warning, continued their normal lives, and had no idea that disaster was approaching until the moment it struck. The team understood how this would immediately relate to the world today because many people now dismiss warnings about global danger, live without concern for moral or social collapse, and treat every crisis as something that will never touch them. The team attempted one final deep scan, and this was the moment that terrified them most. The forbidden chamber. The moment the team drilled a thin micro borehole into the sealed chamber, the atmosphere in the field lab changed. This was the first time anyone had physically reached inside any part of the buried structure, and every person present understood the seriousness of that step. The probe slid through the wall material smoothly, which already surprised the engineers because the outer shell felt harder than normal wood. As soon as the probe entered the chamber, the radiation detector on the console began to climb. The screen changed from green to yellow within seconds and then to orange, which meant the radiation levels were moving from normal to elevated and then into a range that required caution. These color changes only happen when the detector senses radiation far above what should be present in the environment. The team froze and stared at the meter. Buried wooden rooms do not emit radiation under any circumstances, and the rising numbers made it clear that something inside the chamber was producing energy that did not match any natural explanation.
Right now, this is bird's eye view, and you can see this is kind of the bow of what we believe to be a ship structure.
A second instrument showed another alarming detail. The internal air pressure inside the chamber was rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. This kind of movement can only happen when something inside a sealed space expands and contracts repeatedly. One engineer whispered that it almost looked like the breathing cycle of a large organism, although no one was willing to accept that idea openly. The team checked the instruments for malfunction, but the pressure chart repeated the same pattern every time. When the chemical analysis from the probe returned, the findings only increased the tension. The chamber walls were coated with a black tar-like pitch that matched the material described in Genesis 6:14, where God instructs Noah to cover the ark inside and out with pitch. However, this pitch contained ash and crystalline particles that did not match any local minerals. Under the microscope, the crystals showed a pattern that looked engineered rather than natural. A member of the team familiar with biblical Hebrew explained that the word for pitch in Genesis, kopher, is the same word the Bible later uses for atonement, which means a covering or protective seal that shields people from danger or judgment. In Scripture, atonement is used when something must be covered to prevent harm or to stop the spread of guilt or corruption. Once this was explained, the implication became much clearer to the team. The chamber might not have been sealed only to keep water out during the flood. It may have been sealed the way the Bible describes covering something that must be contained or separated, meaning the chamber could have been deliberately closed to keep whatever was placed inside from ever escaping. The team then mapped the chamber's shape, and the results caused instant distress. The chamber was not shaped like a storage area or an animal pen. It resembled the dimensions of an ancient sarcophagus, long and narrow, designed to contain a single occupant. This discovery forced the team to reevaluate everything they believed about the Ark. If one chamber was designed like a tomb or a prison, the Ark may have served more than one purpose during the flood. As the scan expanded outward, a small side cavity became visible beside the chamber. Inside it were physical artifacts, and none of them matched the remains of any known animals. This new discovery pushed the team toward the next step, even though every person in the room felt a growing sense of fear about what they were uncovering. The bones that should not exist. The team expected the narrow adjoining tunnel to contain soil, broken wood, or collapsed debris from the structure. Instead, the moment the first lights were lowered into the space, the room fell silent. Scattered across the floor of the tunnel were fragmented skeletal remains that did not match any known animal. The bones were not arranged by natural forces. They were stacked in a deliberate pattern, as if someone had placed them there intentionally. One researcher said it looked more like a quarantine pile than a random collapse, and the weight of that statement immediately filled the space with tension. As the team examined the bones one by one, the details became even more disturbing. The rib spacing was far too tight for any mammal. The ribs sat so close together that the lungs of a normal animal would not have had room to expand. The jaw structure looked reptilian, but not like any common reptile. It had a double hinge that would have allowed the mouth to open wider than normal, and the teeth were arranged in alternating lengths, which is not a pattern seen in modern species. The vertebrae added another layer of confusion because they were formed in a spiral shape instead of a straight line. This type of spine is not found in any documented animal on record. The bones were carefully retrieved using a remote mechanical arm that fit through the narrow tunnel, and small fragments were placed in sterile containers. These samples were then sent for immediate DNA analysis using portable sequencing equipment. When the results appeared, the room once again fell completely still. The machine identified several partial sequences, but none of them matched anything in the global DNA database. The software flagged the samples as unknown, meaning they did not belong to mammals, reptiles, birds, or any surviving species. A geneticist on the team explained that this could mean the creature was either part of a completely extinct line or something that existed only before the flood. The implication was that this might be biological evidence from a world that no longer exists. A biblical scholar on the team then drew attention to Genesis 6:4, which states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward." He explained in simple terms that this passage refers to beings that were not ordinary humans or normal animals. According to the verse, these beings were the result of corruption or mixing that took place before the flood. If such creatures truly existed, Noah would not have taken them aboard as part of the animals meant to repopulate the earth. They would have been separated, contained, or disposed of. This interpretation made the stacked bones appear even more intentional, as if Noah had been instructed to isolate corrupted creatures away from the animals he was commanded to save. The wooden wall of the tunnel revealed one final detail. There were claw marks across the surface, but all of them pointed inward. This meant the creature inside the tunnel had not tried to break into the Ark, but had tried to resist being moved deeper into the structure. The idea that something inside the Ark had been fighting confinement unsettled everyone on the team. When the researchers followed the clawed tunnel deeper, they discovered something even more alarming. The pre-flood script. The tunnel widened as the team moved deeper, and the beam of the first flashlight passed over something that made everyone freeze. The inner wall of the Ark was not plain wood. It was covered in carvings pressed into a hardened, resin-like pitch that lined the entire corridor. The markings were not random scratches or damage from age. They formed a structured script. At first glance, it resembled Proto-Sinaitic writing, one of the earliest known alphabets, but the shapes and patterns did not match any recorded language. A linguist on the team leaned in close and immediately stated that the script looked far older than anything found in the ancient Near East. He suggested that it might even predate the events described in Genesis 11.
The story of Noah's Ark is told in the biblical book of Genesis. After God creates the universe and mankind begins with Adam and Eve, they go on to populate the earth. 10 generations later, Noah's born.
When humanity's languages were divided at Babel, this meant the writing could belong to a time when the entire world shared a common tongue. The team worked slowly to document each symbol. When the markings were digitally enhanced, the script revealed repeated phrases that could be translated with a degree of confidence. The first phrase read, "Bind the corrupted." The second read, "Seal them for the fire." The third sent a wave of shock through the room. "Do not open until the end of days." These statements were warnings, and they clearly referred to living beings that were not meant to roam free. The finding completely contradicted the familiar image of Noah's Ark as a peaceful floating zoo. Instead of cute animals lined up in rows, the inscriptions described something being restrained and sealed. The implication was simple and frightening. Noah did not just save life from the flood. He confined something dangerous inside the Ark under direct instruction. The biblical scholar on site pointed to a passage from 2 Peter 2:4, which states, "God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to pits of darkness, reserved for judgment." He explained that early Jewish and Christian writings described certain beings, possibly linked to the Nephilim of Genesis 6:4, being confined by God until a future time of judgment. The wording of the inscriptions fit this idea with disturbing accuracy. If Noah participated in this containment, then part of his mission involved sealing corrupted beings inside specially designated compartments. Some inscriptions included crude diagrams or maps carved into the pitch. These sketches seemed to outline where inside the Ark certain sealed areas were located. When the team compared the placement of the carved maps to their earlier scans, the match was exact. The largest marked containment area on the map aligned perfectly with the same chamber discovered earlier that showed abnormal radiation, rising and falling internal pressure, and pulsed magnetism. This confirmation created a heavy silence in the tunnel, as the researchers understood that Noah himself had marked the location of whatever was imprisoned inside that chamber. The deeper they progressed, the more the inscriptions intensified in tone. Some carvings used thicker strokes as if made with great force, while others appeared rushed, as though engraved in desperation. It became clear that whoever wrote them believed that opening the sealed areas would bring catastrophic consequences. But it was the next discovery that drove the fear in the team to a new level. When the tunnel opened into a wider interior corridor, they saw a massive reinforced door built deep inside the Ark. This massive door, unlike anything else in the structure, hinted at something Noah feared more than the rising waters themselves: the Ark's internal seal. The door stood at the end of a narrow corridor like a barrier built to withstand unimaginable force.
And it plays out almost identically to the story of Noah's Ark.
Unlike the rest of the Ark's wooden construction, this door was made from multiple layers of tightly bonded timber, thick coats of pitch, and wide metallic bands that wrapped across its surface like restraints. The metal was not decorative. It looked engineered for strength, hammered across the door to prevent any movement. When the researchers illuminated the inner face of the door, they saw hundreds of impact marks spread across the surface. Each mark pushed outward toward the corridor, not inward. These were not signs of damage from the outside world. They were signs that something inside the sealed chamber had struck the door repeatedly, with enough force to leave deep indentations. No one spoke for several seconds as they processed the meaning. Something had tried to escape, and Noah had built the door strong enough to keep it contained. The support beams surrounding the door reinforced that conclusion. Unlike the structural beams elsewhere in the ARK, which were designed to support weight and stabilize the frame, these beams were set diagonally and horizontally across the doorway like a cage. They were not designed for protection from floodwaters. They were designed to prevent the door from ever being opened again. An engineer said with a tense voice that Noah must have added these reinforcements after everything else was already built, because the beams cut across other construction lines in a way that looked improvised under urgent conditions. A biblical scholar stepped closer and reminded the team of Genesis 7:16, which says, "And the Lord shut him in." He explained that most people assume this refers only to God closing the outer door of the ark to protect Noah from the flood. However, when placed in the context of what the team was now seeing, the verse might carry a second meaning. The shutting could have included the sealing of something dangerous inside one of the internal chambers. If God had instructed Noah to confine corrupted beings or creatures linked to the events described in Genesis 6, then this reinforced door may have been part of that command. The team then examined the hinges. What they found alarmed them. The hinges were fused solid because they had been exposed to extreme heat at some point. The wood around the hinge plates was darkened, and the metal bands showed warping consistent with a high-temperature event. This did not match any natural explanation. Something had caused the door to be sealed permanently with heat far beyond anything expected inside a wooden vessel built in ancient times. Some members of the team suggested a supernatural event, while others insisted there had to be an unknown natural source, but no explanation satisfied the group. Behind the door was the chamber marked in the inscriptions as a place where corrupted beings had been sealed. The pressure in the room grew as the team prepared to conduct one more scan, this time aimed beyond the reinforced structure. They needed to know what was on the other side. What they detected redefined the ARK entirely and pushed the discovery into territory none of them were ready to face. The final scan. The team initiated the final round of testing with a cutting-edge seismic scanner designed to detect microscopic shifts inside sealed environments.
How you doing, Seth?
Just finished 120 scans.
You finished 120 scans?
Yes, millions
Wow.
of data.
They expected the chamber behind the reinforced door to be completely still, since a closed space buried for thousands of years should remain motionless. Instead, the scanner returned a set of readings that forced every person in the room to stop what they were doing. The chart displayed tiny but steady movements inside the chamber. These movements were not random vibrations or geological settling. They appeared in a consistent pattern with evenly spaced intervals. A biophysicist on the team recognized the pattern immediately. The rhythm matched a biological oscillation signal, the same frequency used today to identify dormant or slow metabolic organisms. The idea that something inside the chamber could still produce even the faintest biological activity seemed impossible, yet the readings persisted across every scan cycle. The team double-checked the calibration, replaced the equipment, and ran the test again. The results did not change. Then something even more unsettling took place. The scanner emitted short pulse waves to map the interior, and the chamber responded. Each time the device released a pulse, the oscillation inside shifted slightly, almost as if whatever was inside could sense the external activity and react to it. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. A researcher stepped back from the console and quietly said that they needed to stop immediately, but the lead scientist insisted that they gather enough data to confirm the results before making any decision. As the test continued, the oscillation strengthened. A meteorologist on the team pointed out that a thunderstorm was moving across the region. When the electrical activity outside increased, the movements inside the chamber sharpened. The pattern rose in intensity each time lightning struck in the distance, suggesting that whatever was inside was affected by or responding to atmospheric energy. This reaction raised the possibility that the sealed chamber was not just preserving something, but suppressing it, and that exposure to certain environmental conditions might disturb its dormant state. A biblical scholar monitoring the readings referenced two passages that many had ignored until that moment. Revelation 9 describes ancient forces that are released in a future time of judgment, and Luke 17:26-30 states that the last days will resemble the days of Noah. The scholar explained that these warnings spoke of old powers restrained until a determined moment. The fact that the chamber responded to electrical activity and external scanning made the team fear that they had unintentionally provoked something that had remained undisturbed since the flood. The final frame of the seismic scan delivered the worst shock of all. A distortion formed near the inner wall of the chamber, as if a mass inside had shifted closer. The anomaly pressed outward in a slow, deliberate movement. The team watched in silence as the wall flexed by an almost imperceptible amount. This was the first recorded physical interaction with the sealed chamber, and it destroyed any remaining belief that the structure was empty or inactive. Within minutes, the project director received a direct order from authorities to halt all operations. The equipment was shut down, the data was seized, and the chamber was officially declared off-limits. The team was instructed to evacuate the site immediately and remain silent about everything they had seen. What they witnessed in that final scan made one thing unmistakably clear. Whatever Noah sealed inside the Ark has not fully slept in more than 4,000 years. Make sure to click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.